All right, so type design, when we're adding color, I just colored behind the I and the D here, right? We can color behind it, we can color around it. I'm just using gradient effects to get that banner. But if I open up other effects, I can also add the white stroke around it to match. But to get a sense of that, let me turn on the background, or a background, and then we're going to find a new background. So if I open up the effects, I can add a stroke. This is the white outside stroke, but I'm going to thin it out, right? Something like that. And then maybe I want to move the coloring for the letters up above it, right? So they're colored, they have a stroke on the outside, but not on the inside. See that difference? So it's just really understanding your layers. That way I can thicken the stroke a little bit. I can color inside these letters. So how would I do that? I go to my vector layer, I hold down my magic wand. Just like digital coloring, hold down Shift, I select all of these contained shapes. And then on a layer behind it, I think will work best. I'm going to use my paint bucket and fill that in. Let's do a dark purple. Let's make it darker. I'll just do edit fill with the foreground color, so I don't have to click each one. Right. Now, if I want, I can also push that above. And I kind of like that, but if I wanted to add layer styles to that, I certainly could. So I can add my own stroke, and maybe I make that a little bit thinner. Right. I can add a drop shadow. So it shows up a little bit stronger. I can even give that drop shadow a color, because it's about voting, you know, red states, blue states, all that kind of thing. Maybe I blend it in with a blue. So my drop shadow is a blue. Take that opacity up. So you get this subtle kind of purplish to the coloring. Maybe I want to make that a little bit lighter and then just set it to normal mode. Like that. Let's see, is there anything else I want to play with? Now you can push that type design lots of different ways, right? With strokes, drop shadows, additional strokes. The nice thing about drop shadows is they're directional, whereas glows are not. So on the I and the D, I can just select those vector shapes and duplicate those and add a different stroke just to those. As long as you have the vector, you're fine. So I'm just going to make this stroke a little bit bigger to kind of match my sticker. Yeah, I think that works. And now, I don't really like the purple. Let me see. Now I got to figure out a background for my poster. Play with this drop shadow behind the "You're welcome." Going to set it to dissolve and then take its opacity down. There we go. Get a little bit of texture in there. And you can do just all kinds of things. One trick I sometimes do is make a duplicate and then rasterize the layer style on the duplicate. So I'll show you what that does. That allows me to do things like just select the white here and then bring it up above so it's cleaner. Yeah. Okay, so now what's a good background? I already know where my background goes. It's where the gray is. But I want to texture it. I want to fill it. And I can do that with layer styles. I can take that gray, make a duplicate of it, fill it with a gradient, right? I can pick kind of a crazy gradient. And then I can put a color over the top of it, maybe a light blue, and then take down the opacity on it so the gradient shows through. I could say, okay, I like that, but it's too dark. What if I invert it? I can go to Image Adjustments and flip it. Oh, but I got to rasterize that if I did that. There's just all kinds of things to do to get a background. Now, what I want is some sort of color in your background. Can't just be black, definitely can't be white, right? And I want some sort of texture. So you see this gradient there, how can I get a texture to that? Well, if I set it from normal mode to dissolve and then take it down a little bit with the gray coming through, it will give me that kind of sandpapery texture, which is called a sand diffuse pattern. I can also composite in a background. So maybe I look and I look for on Pixabay. Interesting. Oh, I didn't put the I in there. And I look for a halftone background. So we've talked a lot about halftone printing and halftone effects. You can see things like this, like this, like this. So what do I do with these? I kind of like this cloudiness. What I do is I open them and I download them at the largest size I can. They go to my downloads folder. Interesting that that one's not very big. It's the minimum size. This one's a vector graphic. So I can even download it as an SVG. And now I can drag and drop those in. So I'm most interested in this one. And I'm going to stretch it, hold down Shift and Option, like so. Give myself a little outline on the border. And then I can play with its blending modes. Like pin light, soft light. It gives me those little stars in there. Maybe try lighten is good. And then I'm going to take this opacity down. Yeah, I don't like how that just grays it all out. So I can duplicate it, bring those two together, and then I can set it to dissolve, because this is rasterizing it, right? And then take that texture down to get a little bit of texture there. But what if I want a different background, like this blue? Those halftone dots. Hold down Option and Shift. Now I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And I can play with different blending modes. Ooh, look at that. You have kind of the red bleeding through. Yeah, I liked that. And now let's just take that opacity down a little bit. So that's a pretty busy background, right? So if I wanted to knock it down a little, I could just put another layer on top of it and then fill that with white, like onion skin it a little bit, and then just knock that back, maybe with dissolve. And that looks really busy, but when it actually prints, it would be pretty clean like this. All right, so that's how we do a poster. What's the last step? I turn on the white background, which gives me my border, and then I go to the very top so I don't get this moire effect, which makes it look a lot more messy than it is. Hold down Option, go to Layer, Merge, Visible. There we go, and then you can see how it would actually turn out if I were to print it. Right. Now, I can also bring back in, at this stage, my spot illustration from assignment 5. And maybe tweak it a little bit. Maybe even play with its contrast. So I can go to Image, Adjustments, and Levels. Even while it's still a smart object, I can do this. I can brighten its mid-tones, darken its darks, brighten its highlights. Just to kind of dial in its coloring for this poster. And I can play with, we always start with levels, with its color balance. Shift a little bit more towards, well, away from the reds, I guess. Yeah, I think that helps. And then the last one is hue saturation, right? So levels, color balance, and hue saturation. The beauty of these 3 direct adjustments is you can do them even to, so I can take the saturation down just a tiny bit and maybe shift the hue. Then I'm going to just isolate the yellows. And I'm going to brighten those, saturate those a little bit more. You just have tons and tons of control because we're playing with raster smart objects and vector smart objects with our type. And then the last thing you might play with, we already played with CMYK and halftoning, is I can bring the line art in from my assignment 5, that EPS, that vector line art, right? And I can use that to tighten it up and clean it. So these are all the elements you need for its standard poster design. textured and